No one cares about the tech. What they care about is what it does for you or how it makes you feel. A lot of founders just get enamored in the technology, where at the end of the day, all they care about is what's in it for me.
Yeah, I feel like that's a key part for early founders to hear
Exactly.
and reach out.
It takes a lot more than a technology to move a market.
I really enjoyed this conversation with Karl Schmieder. He's the founder of MessagingLab and the co-host of the Grow Everything podcast. His background in both biochemistry and writing gives him a unique perspective on how to communicate science clearly. We talked about his journey into storytelling, how founders can better communicate with investors and the public, the role of AI, and why understanding your audience matters so much in this industry. So let's dive in. I found that interesting. You kind of started in biochemistry and then creative writing, and kind of using that, I'm sure has come in handy for you in the route that you've chosen with Messaging Labs. But just tell us a little bit more about that and your background and how Messaging Labs came to curation.
Yeah, I do have an unusual background in that I have a master's in biochemistry and then a second master's in creative writing. But I always wanted to work in biotech. And I think when I was doing my master's, I realized that I really wasn't a lab person. I really didn't have the patience for it. But I always had it in me that I always wanted to be a writer. And so I enrolled in an MFA program. And while I was in that MFA program, I also worked at a management consulting firm in Denver. And kept thinking to myself, these guys are basically writers. They happen to have a niche. Someone's got to be doing this in biotechnology. And so I really spent probably around 10 years, the beginning of my career, in different roles at public relations firms. First doing pharmaceutical product launches, so doing all the communications and strategy that would go into a launch for a major pharmaceutical drug. And I launched some big ones. And then worked at a firm that was much smaller, like a much more boutique-y biotech PR and investor relations firm, where I just really got exposed to lots of biotech companies. And I got to write about all these great technologies that were, far from being on the market. I felt like I had the best job in the world because I was writing science fiction about things that were really happening. And so I did that for about 10 years. Then I went to work at a .com because I got recruited by a friend who was like, you know how to do business development? I don't think that I knew yet, but I'd done a lot in both of the PR firms. Because one of the things, given my background, they really liked that they could bring in someone who could actually talk the science and understand the science to the people on the other side of the table who would be from a pharmaceutical company or a biotech company. And eventually ended up starting like the first iteration of MessagingLab with a friend of mine. And we were really like a branding company and kind of got away from biotech. And eventually, after doing that for a while, I went back in-house to PR. And then I was like, I don't really want to do this anymore. I really want to come up with my own vision in terms of what a communications agency was. And spent a lot of time and a lot of money learning what marketing was so that I could understand really what the Swiss Army knife of marketing is, so that when you have a specific problem, you can start with a strategy and then go from that strategy to a tactic that is going to be effective to get a result that is going to impact a business. And along the way, most of the clients were biopharma for many years. And really about 10, 15 years ago, I started looking at other applications of biotech because I was like, in my vision, when I was very young, I thought these technologies would be applied everywhere. And I was probably reading science fiction where people were using, biotech that way. And it was really like 15 years ago, 20 years ago when there was like a biofuels boom that turned into a biofuels disaster that then spawned a lot of new startup companies where these scientists were applying biotech to other things. Concrete that heals itself, new materials, new ways of making things, new ways of making chemicals, and just looking at biology as a technology writ large and then applying it to really big problems. So I ended up co-writing a book about that called What's Your Biostrategy? And from that kind of really honed the practice down. So yes, we still do biopharma, but we mostly focus on non-healthcare biotech. And I'm happy to talk about any of that at length. But one of the most interesting areas where biotech is being applied that most people don't realize is in personal care and cosmetics and home care. And we were very lucky to work with a company that is a biotech company disguised as a hair care company. They're called K18 Hair. And K18 had this meteoric rise. They basically came on the market. People in hair salons fell in love with the product because what the product does is it basically takes hair that is chemically damaged. And what K18 does is it repairs hair at the keratin chain level. And I can talk about this a lot because I got to know hair at a level that I didn't know before. And the stylists love it because you spray this stuff on and you basically have a virgin palette. And you can dye it again, and then you put K18 on again, and you end up with hair that is almost, it's dyed, but it feels like it's untouched. And the stylists love it. The people in the chair love it, and this thing went viral. They ended up, making a ton of money, and they got bought by one of the biggest consumer product groups in the world, Unilever. And we're still very friendly with them. We're huge fans of theirs, but they were like an example for us of what is possible when you take biotech, apply it to a very specific problem, and then have a playbook for commercializing it.
That was when you were bringing that up in terms of like the story at different stages in the commercialization process. I'm just curious, like, because you had brought about, when they're at those initial parts versus, actually going to commercialization, and how do you, because that's a fit, I feel like, for a little more broader scope with founders, whether that's biotech for, in the healthcare realm or outside of it. But how do you gauge that, and how does that alter like the story depending on the life cycle they're at?
It really depends on the audience, and the audience is going to change depending on where a company is in its life cycle. At the beginning, the story might be simply for investors. Getting investors excited about a technology, really what the benefits of that technology are. I mean, we are very big on no one cares about the tech. What they care about is what it does for you or how it makes you feel. That kind of, advertising, I guess, truism, sell the sizzle, not the steak. But it really depends on where the company is in its life cycle. There's always going to be internal communications that you have to deal with. There's going to be different kinds of stakeholders depending on who you're going to be selling to. And these days, a lot of what we talk about is kind of ecosystem architecting. So really thinking through the life cycle of a product and who are all the people along the supply chain or the value chain or the value network that need to know about your company, and how might they need different communications. And I think depending on the company and depending on the stage they're at, that can be a challenge because you're either thinking customer investor, and you might not be thinking manufacturer, regulatory, end user. Like there's going to be a lot of different people depending on the kind of company you are. And each of them might need a slightly different kind of story. So it's a long answer to your question, because I think the question really has to be, what stage is the company at and who are they trying to reach?
I feel like that's an important part of it too, is that, yeah, depending on the outreach, not just the life cycle, but depending on where they're going with that. And then how do you help them do that? I mean, what are some of the questions or different things that you do? I just find that this is unique. And that's why I was curious about you, because you've got the science part, but then you have the writing part. I don't find that a lot of founders have that in common. So they really know the science, but sometimes that crafting that and getting that out there can be a challenge.
We start with strategy, and strategy involves asking the questions. What's your goal? What are you trying to do? Who's your audience? Who's your audience is? Who's going to make this stuff? Are you making it? How many people are on your team? What does the growth of your company look like? What's the world going to look like if you're successful? Who do you compete against? What does failure look like if we have this conversation in a year and things haven't worked out for you? What's going to be the reason that happened? Who are your competitors? Who are peers? Who can help you? There's a whole bunch of questions that we ask, and we do it very systematically. And usually if a founder hasn't ever worked with someone like us, I think they're actually surprised by the depth of the questions that we ask. And we really try to be as, we feel like we're doing homework that isn't just for us, but it's also for the founders, because we want them to see that there's going to be gaps in the way that they think. And those gaps are places that we can either help fill, either through communications, or those offer us an opportunity to tell a stronger story.
Then how did the messaging labs then go into the Grow Everything podcast? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
My business partner, Iram Aziz Khan, and I had known each other for like 10, 15 years, and we worked a little bit together. And I'd always thought that there should be a more general biotech podcast. Like most of the podcasts that are focused on biotechnology are very insider focused. And the big majority of them are focused on biopharma. So they're focused on health. And that makes sense. I mean, that's a $600 billion market. It's gigantic. And that's where most of the effort in biotech is focused. So Iram joined me, and she started going to events with me. And I had mentioned I'd like to start a podcast. And what she realized very intelligently was that we were having all these great conversations with people that never see the light of day. Like people, we joke around. My wife will joke around and say, "You guys are so funny because you find humor in protein synthesis." Yeah, we can, because we're finding humor in all sorts of biological processes. But we were meeting all these people that are doing really interesting things with biotechnology that just people don't know about. And so I said, why don't we start a podcast? We'll highlight, some of the people that we know, some founders, and and so we started, and here we are, 150 episodes later. I will still say that what we do is we highlight people who are doing really interesting things with biotech or even biology that people just don't normally hear about. And the compliments that we've gotten are like, a lot of them are from the founders or entrepreneurs who listen, who say, I had my mom listen to it. The way you guys ask the questions made her understand finally what I do. So that's like a big win for us. And then, it's, again, it kind of feeds our curiosity, and it also has helped with this, network that we've built that really gets people in, really particularly in consumer product goods companies and some biotech, interested in what else is going on in the biotech industry.
Yeah, no, that's exciting. The scope and breadth of it, when I looked at what you guys cover, was way more than I was. When I feel like with a lot of people, when I think of biotech, I'm not thinking of all those applications that are out there that you guys touch on.
Yeah, I mean, we touch on biomaterials is a big one. And you had said that you had been in biomaterials. I'd love to hear about that. But it's super interesting to us because so many materials, let's just, go basic steel, plastic, and fibers. And so much of that is being created still from things that are just not recycled. So take biology into that, and you can all of a sudden start creating materials that don't exist, materials that you can design on the atomic level, materials that have different performance characteristic than what exists in nature. And what's interesting is that market is supposed to grow to be another $600 billion market. I know this stat because I just looked it up this morning. And it's the worst, materials is the worst performing sector in investing right now. It's like a 1% or 2% growth. And yet there is so much opportunity there.
It's interesting. I had someone on with nano technology too, and just that whole space of what we can create. Well, you touched on something that I'm interested in. Why do you think that is? That's what I'm seeing too, is there's amazing things going out there, but then the investment's not necessarily following that. And I see that you help founders with that as well. And what do you see on the horizon for that? Or I'm just curious to dig into more of that aspect of it.
I think I think I wouldn't be the only one to say that the challenge for biomaterials has just been adoption and the ability to scale up quickly at cost parity to existing materials. This goes back to something I'd said earlier, where a lot of founders just get enamored in the technology and they want to talk about the technology, where at the end of the day, a buyer, whether they're a business or a consumer, all they care about is what's in it for me. Is it going to cost me more? If it's got a good story attached to it, that might get people to adopt it faster. I mean, you just think of some of the brands that have popped up like Allbirds or On sneakers. They've got an interesting story, but it's not really about sustainability. And one of the things that we say is no one cares about sustainability. It's like a secondary or tertiary story. I mean, ultimately we do care about it. We have to care about it if we care about the health of our planet. But what consumers really want is something that's going to work, offer something different, and ideally not cost more than, the existing product. There are people who are early adopters who are going to buy that stuff. So I think scale, like being able to go from lab to, benchtop to 10,000 liters, that's a big challenge, and it's not cheap. And a lot of people, we just did a episode on, we called it a report on reports, and then we followed up with an episode called the Graveyard Report. We know this investment firm that did a report on the big industrial biotech failures, and Biomaterials falls into that. And the big reason they failed was because they were going after these really cheap commodity industries like fuel, where you're never going to be able to compete against petroleum. Whereas what we see in biotech, in materials, in, basically any market, it's just, you have to have a very well-defined niche. And if you go after a very valuable niche, you're more likely to be successful because you can succeed in a niche easier. I know it's all relative. And then you can, expand from there. It's kind of like the Tesla model. And there is a name for that, which I don't remember, where you start with like a roadster for a limited number of people. It's way expensive. And then you go down market. And we've seen Tesla do this. Now they've got, I guess, the Model Y or Model X, and it's pretty inexpensive compared to where they started.
And I feel like that's the key, is getting involved early as far as crafting that. And I feel like that's where you could come in, or, at that early stage before they go too far down a path to potentially, I see that a lot. I was in a biodesign program at Stanford, and that's that early thinking of like that fit, and they can get really enamored in the technology, which is really amazing. But then it's like, how is this actually going to end up in the result to get into someone's hands and get investment?
I mean, we see it over and over again, and I don't think it's something that you're ever going to not see, just because founders, you want to be passionate about your technology. We want them to be, but they also they need to have that kind of expansive view in terms of like, what's it going to look like when everybody's wearing your shoe? How are you going to get to that level of scale? You don't have to get there tomorrow, but maybe you should at least think about what the steps are to get to where you want to end up. And that is something we do help with, is it just that kind of thinking, where how do we get you to the place where you want to be?
Why do you think it is that so many biotech, and I'm focusing a lot on medtech too in my past, but why do you think they struggle with the messaging oftentimes, even though they have such a great science?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of it is that science founder mentality, and I don't want to generalize it too much so that I don't alienate anybody, but I think in many cases, again, they do get very enamored with the science or the technology, and they forget that someone's got to use it. It's not if we build it, they will come situation. It's like, you've got to build it, show it works, and then get people excited about using it. There's steps along the way that make it possible for you to do that. But I think really ultimately it comes down to that scientist who is just enamored with a tech, and they forget that, it takes a lot more than a technology to move a market.
Yeah. I feel like that's a key part for early founders to hear
Exactly.
And reach out for people who specialize in different arenas that can help bring those things. I feel like I'm sure that's when you see a lot of these, you're passionate about, you hear about this technology and you really want to help them get this out there into the world.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the reason. I joke around that we wouldn't have a business if scientists knew how to be storytellers or knew how to be marketers. It's funny, but there's some truth to it. And then, in the podcast, what we do is we do feature a lot of people who we do get very passionate about the technology. We are excited about it for them, and we want other people to be exposed to it, just so that people know that these things are happening, and there are people out there who are doing things that are really going to make a difference in the world. But it's up to really all of us to help them scale and to see what the potential is.
I had someone on the podcast that he started and sold the company. Now he's thinking about what's to do next, and he's going through all these they call them tech libraries, essentially, at all these universities, and it's just all these patents and all these technologies that will never see the light of day, that are just amazing inventions that are just probably not going to get out there. And looking at how can we do that, how can we get these out there. And yeah, I feel like what you're doing is really helping some of these people who speak one language speak another language so they can get these things and get investment and scale. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I think that's super exciting. We have a friend who's got a company who just recently said that like one of the most untapped areas for new businesses is exactly that, going into, tech libraries, looking at patents. Someone recently said to us, like, patents that were filed for biotech discoveries in the 80s and 90s that never saw the light of day. There's like so much there. And I think it's going to be really interesting to be able to mine that stuff with AI and, create this
Yeah.
matrix. How easy is it for me to get this patent or to license it? How easy is it for me to get this to the market? And what's the size of the market? And I'm thinking if you've got an AI tool, you could really come up with an interesting matrix to figure out what the priorities should be, and then, build companies off of that. It's super exciting.
Yeah, it is to me too. I mean, what I see that is that's exactly what I was thinking when he said that. Like, how can we take all these, put them through AI and develop these metrics and then use that to then go secure investment as well.
Yeah.
On that note, I mean, how is AI changing anything for you as far as the way you see crafting messaging or scaling?
I mean, I'm a heavy AI user. I usually have, ChatGPT and Claude running in the background. It makes it very easy to crank out. At first I was like, this is going to change. The big change is going to be for anybody who has to communicate, just getting over blank page syndrome, which a lot of people can't look at a blank page and write anything on it because it's, they have to get over it. And so for that kind of thing, I think it's been like, there's a lot of things that we do where it just makes it very easy, quick, dirty email. But I have also spent a lot of time behind the scenes really kind of learning how to use AI. So writing my own GPTs, crafting prompts, spending many hours to come up with prompts that are going to actually result in content that sounds like me. I still end up doing a lot of editing on that stuff, but I have found it really helpful. I just finished a novel, has nothing to do with biotech. It's a mystery. And I use both Claude and GPT to edit it and kind of develop this workflow, not automated, but had instructions in both of those tools so that it would make the process easier. And a lot of times I was dissatisfied with what would come out, but other times it did turn out to be much easier. I think from the research point of view, it's a game changer. Thinking about marketing too, it makes it easier to just think through what a marketing sequence might look like, email sequence, anything that has to be sequenced. We haven't gotten to the point where we use it, to automate tasks like that, but we see it coming. So we're definitely thinking about how do we use it to make us. I mean, I feel like it does make us more efficient, but when it comes to lead scoring, helping with sales, thinking through what a sales conversation would look like, that kind of stuff we use them for. But I think a lot of that stuff being automated is going to be very interesting.
Yeah, I do too. How do you see founders using that? I mean, I feel like conversations with the early life science founders sometimes not, or do you see them engaging with those tools? Or
I feel like yes, and I find it really interesting to see how they're using them more deeply. For example, like we've got a client that we work with, it's a company called Aclid. They started off as a biosecurity company, meaning they're working with companies that synthesize DNA. And DNA is basically like the picks and shovels of the bioeconomy. You need to synthesize a lot of it. And so their initial product was something that if you ordered a sequence, the AI would read your sequence and look for pieces that could be flagged as either an organism that you're not supposed to be producing or a part of an organism. So that was AI that would fit on the client side, and they were like doing this, that they're AI first kind of company. But then now they've kind of moved into lab safety. So if you have a lab, there's trainings that your team has to go through. Sorry. There's all sorts of documentation that you have to keep, and there are different people who do that, and they do different parts of it. But ACLED has really started to stitch this stuff together in a way that makes it much easier for a lab manager to only have to deal with one tool, and it's going to give them calendar reminders of, hey, these people have to be these people have to be trained on X system. You need to check this kind of inventory. Here's some registrations that you need to do. Here's, some waste disposal things you have to do. And so I think from that point of view, seeing that kind of use of AI has really been interesting, and fascinating, because they're doing it from the beginning. And then also the people who are doing like, DNA, like protein design, like multiple sequences, putting different kinds of sequences together to end up with new kinds of proteins. And so I do think that founders are using the tools a lot more than previously. I mean, we also work with a company that does AI drug design, which has been really super interesting. There's been billions and billions of dollars thrown at AI drug design, but we still don't have a drug on the market that resulted from that. But like, for example, this client that we have, they've got a very interesting methodology that makes it much faster to design drugs, and they don't need huge amounts of compute. So the way that they've like tweaked algorithms and come up with their own really allows them to work much more efficiently in a space that's very challenging. The founders that are out there that are using it are really able to move faster and leapfrog, people who aren't using the tools.
Yeah, that's what I see. It's just that scalability and
Yeah.
efficiency. Have you seen companies using it specifically more for their go-to market, like their strategy? I mean, I know there's a lot of technologies out there, or how they're making more efficient, like there's the science aspect of it, but do you see them using it within their business strategy? Just how you spoke to, but in a different way about your book, how you're using it to be more
Yeah.
effective.
I can look at it from a marketing point of view and say, here's how we could use that, or how we could automate it, or how AI makes us more efficient doing that. I think for go to market, it's the same kind of thing. It becomes a research tool, but then I wonder, are you also seeing it as a way of, okay, we've got a thesis around a market. How do we use AI to confirm that thesis? Like, what are you seeing? Because you had said you're also doing go to market with AI tools.
Yeah, I feel like it's similar, as I can relate it to what you spoke to about your book. It's you're creating your own models. Let's say, about that market that you're attacking and what you're going at. Look at the competitive landscape, and then you have that tool that you're consistently. It's like another person in your boardroom, or
Totally.
potentially, that you're looking to and creating as you're going through the process. Because I just feel like sometimes in that science realm, they could really put your head down and focus on the science. But then as you're going to, there's other things happening out there, and that can be a great tool to use along the way, as you're going to market, and with commercialization as well, and to help sell that story as you spoke to when you're going out there, depending on that audience, where you can have this tool that you have that's consistently helping you along the way, and then craft that. If they worked with somebody like you, I could see, and they craft that original story is, okay, how do you see this shifting as we get to this point, this point, this point? And there's just so many ways I feel like I could see them using it, because I see a lot of them that are really heavy AI focused on the science, but not necessarily always how they're using it within their business, or how to even reach investors, reach potential investors. Different automated tools for that.
What I found interesting about getting into ChatGPT and using it for a while, and then I took a vibe coding class because I was like, I really don't know what I'm doing, so I just want to like expose myself to more stuff. And then you come to realize that even if you know a little bit, you're still ahead of most people, but you want to know more. And so
Mhm.
it's what's great about it is there's a lot of people who are out there who are teaching us how to use these tools. And so would imagine like what you're talking about for a go-to-market tool could be very useful. We're talking a lot about building ecosystems, like building these value chains. You've got a founder who's got a technology or a product. They envision that if it's a business, they're going to sell to like a bigger company, but they don't know what the steps are to get there. So who are the investors that are going to make that happen? What kind of infrastructure do they need? What does that infrastructure look like? Who's willing to do a pilot with them? Is it someone who could potentially be an investor if they're successful? If that's successful, what does that look like? How do you get to that end state faster? And I think having the tools that allow us to do that is going to be a game changer.
Yeah, I feel like that too. I know the more like use some of those tools, the more I realize there's to learn, and it's constantly shifting and changing. So I feel like just having that as a part of the strategy, it's such a helpful tool, especially in a constantly shifting and changing landscape. And for some that are resource constrained as an early founder too. I mean, there's only so much consulting and different things that they can bring on somebody that's helping with commercial strategy at a certain point in their life cycle. And that's, I
Yeah.
feel like, just a tool that they can use, usually fairly low cost, but how to use it correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because the thing is, it's like you can end up learning how to create these things for a chat GPT. You hear about, or at least I've heard about, like these founders that have like these 9-page prompts that they spend, weeks or months developing. Is there a way to get to that faster? And that's something I'm super interested in.
Yeah, no, me too. I just spoke with a woman and that's all she does is just real basics of how to bring these tools into your business. Cause I feel like some people would bring them in on this mass scale and then push them out. But then people are just using chat GPT for email or something.
Yeah.
They don't know, no, this can actually help with strategy. It can be something you can put tool in that can make you more efficient, but just how to slowly introduce some of those different platforms into business. But I feel like doing that early, kind of to your point around the science of understanding that strategy on where you're going to commercialization, introducing those tools early, that then it's just part of your business. I feel like
Yeah.
as you get to that point and you can constantly use it to like, what's our pitch going to be now based on what the market's at now and where we're at, then what's our pitch now, and just have that be an extra place to go.
Yeah, I think like what you said earlier in terms of it being like another staff member, another board member, I think really speaks to that point. And I think as the tools become more sophisticated and people become more fluent in using them, it'll become even more the case.
Yeah, no, I see that too. I can't take credit for that. I was at a Tony Robbins actually seminar and
The
really,
the AI one that they've been taught that has been being advertised,
oh, I don't know what that one is.
it's probably the same one. If it was like the Tony Robbins AI seminar.
Oh no, it was this was like, gosh, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. It was
Oh,
Tony
okay.
Robbins Wealth Mastery. And so
Okay.
he has different business. I don't remember the specific person it was, but he has different executives, like people in the business community that he's coached. And he had someone come in and speak to AI. And this is, 3 or 4 years ago in ChatGPT. I don't know, he's maybe just starting. But he
Yeah.
said that. He goes, that's how he sees it. Any company or business that he starts, he's like, when I'm in a meeting, that's someone in the boardroom. They aren't driving decision making, but it's another person to go to. And anytime we have a discussion, we put it into there and then we use it as a discussion point. And
Yeah.
I just, from that just sat with me. Like that is just, it needs to be being done. And I see a lot of early stage companies that aren't necessarily looking at it that way. And the more
Yeah.
information you feed into it, like you said, you were working with a bunch of iterations over and over again. It just takes time, like to do
Yeah,
that.
I mean, when I first started using it, and like on this novel, for example, I did work with a human editor, and at first, I wasn't using it as much, but then as I started to become more fluent in using it, and I started to customize it so that it worked for me, she actually noticed that my human editor noticed that like my edits were coming back cleaner, that I was accomplishing some of the things that I had been looking to do, but it wasn't, hey, edit this for me. Like it was
Yeah.
much more of a process that I had to go through with the AI. And many times I was dissatisfied with what would come back. But, I don't know that it made it faster. I think it probably did. I mean, it still took 2 years to edit this book, but I feel like it's very strong for what it is.
Yeah, it's a tool, like you said, like a back end, almost like a collaborator, more so than
Exactly.
just completely outsourcing sort of
Yeah.
tool. Is there a storytelling principle that you feel like any like a biotech startup should adopt from day one, or however, like, but maybe a different way to verbalize that, but in storytelling, what you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because I think that there's so many, right? Like, marketers, one of the first ones you learn is ADA, grab their attention, keep them interested, drive their desire, and then have them take an action. And there's a bunch of like frameworks like that you end up learning when you're learning to do kind of commercial copywriting or commercial storytelling. But to me, and it's like the 3-act structure, the 4-act structure, these kinds of like, bigger storytelling principles, the hero's journey, there's like a whole multiple steps that happen there. And I think, there's a part of me that just wants to say, keep it really simple, focus on who you're talking to, like know your audience. Like that's a big principle, because if you know who you're talking to, then you can tailor the way that you talk to them. And this is actually something that we teach teams. If you're talking to another scientist, scientists are taught to, hypothesis, discussion, conclusion, you want facts and figures. And so when you go out as a founder to talk to people and you end up talking to another scientist, you end up talking to someone, you want to know who you're talking to so that you just tailor your message to that person. Because the public, on the other hand, they don't care about the details. They just want you to cut to the chase. That's like me saying, just tell me the benefits. Why should I care about this thing? I think that would be the storytelling principle that I would put above everything else, is know who you're talking to. Understand your audience, because then all those other frameworks like ADA or any of the other copywriting tools that you could look up, they all will fit into that. And it becomes much easier. If you're talking to a scientist, getting their attention is going to be a lot different than if you're talking to your grandmother. Maintaining her interest is going to be a lot different than if you're talking to another scientist. Driving that desire is going to be different, and then giving them call to action is going to be very different in both of those audiences. So I think know your audience happens first. And we actually, when we do strategy, we're always like, who's your audience? Who's the most important audience? Why do they matter? Because that's going to inform everything else.
Yeah, I see that. It's such a key part. Just to still at that basic part is your messaging isn't the same all the time.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Wherever you go, and just I have to see that it's such a beneficial. And then that concise aspect of it that you mentioned, like how can you distill some of that science down into abbreviated based on who you're speaking to? Be super helpful, I feel like, for science, especially like you said, oftentimes so passionate about the science. That's what you really want to speak to, and you want them to be passionate about it. But sometimes, depending on who they're speaking to, that might not be the focus of the entirety of the conversation.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you, Karl. I really appreciate your time today, and just everything that we kind of went through. Is there, I guess, how do people, what's the easiest way to find you and what your team does?
So MessagingLab.com is our consulting firm website. Grow Everything is our podcast. You can find it on the Messaging Lab site, but you can also go to all the streaming channels, Spotify, Apple, YouTube. We're on all of those. And you just look for Grow Everything podcast if you're interested in learning more about what's happening in biotechnology. And then, I'm an easy person to find. I'm very active on LinkedIn, Karl Schmieder, Messaging Lab. Karl at MessagingLab is my email if you want to get to me that way.
Well, thanks so much, Karl. I really appreciate your time today and look forward to continuing to follow you and what you're doing and creating there at Messaging Labs and with your podcast. And I just really appreciated the time today.
Thanks so much, Christopher. I really enjoyed the conversation. Look forward to the next one as well.
You've been listening to Stories in Life Sciences, sponsored by MedAccess AI, where we explore people, ideas, and breakthroughs shaping the future of biotech and healthcare innovation. To learn more, visit medaccessai.org and subscribe on YouTube to watch the full conversations and new episodes as they launch. I'm Christopher Wilson. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep shaping the future one story at a time.